The Collectors. Chapter 4. Remi stood at a corner. The sign said Maple and Veronica, but other than those markers, he had no idea where they were. They had been traveling for 30 minutes. No, not traveling, wandering. Remi had no idea where he was going. Whatever instinctual draw had ruled him at the watering hole had fled, and now he was lost at what to do.
Please, I just want to go home.
It said, clinging to him as it had been for the entirety of the trek.
Please.
Remi heaved in a heavy sigh and rubbed his hands over his tired face, trying to think. I'm working on it. He needed to find a large body of water somewhere. That was the trick to this he found early on. Once a spirit found and attached itself to him, it would not leave until Remi had found a way to send it on its way. And through a lot of trial and even more error, he had discovered, by way of that instinctual push once more, that if he brought the dead person to a large enough body of water, a bridge would appear, and the dead would depart, leaving him in peace. But none of his usual places worked. He would typically go to one of the public pools, or even the one at his school when it was summertime. It didn't matter if people were around when he did this. The living couldn't see the dead or the bridge anyway, so no one ever paid him any mind. He was just another person in the crowd. But the public ones were closed during the rainy months, and the indoor pool at his school was currently being used for swim team practice. He would be the center of attention if he walked in on their practice for seemingly no reason at all. Remi knew that a couple of gyms had pools, but he would either have to buy a membership or sneak in. To be honest, at this point, the latter was not seeming like too much of a stretch to him. If he were being even more honest, he would say that he had considered going home, filling up the tub, and simply hoping it was enough water to pass. He groaned, hands rubbing even more roughly over his face before dropping down into a tired crouch right there on the corner of the unknown street. He felt his shirt slip out of the once girl's hand for the briefest of seconds before it clutched at him again, this time closer to the collar of his shirt. He was doing his best not to freak out and to keep his mind away from before, but both of those things were very difficult to do. The snarling countenance of that beast on the bridge was burned into his mind's eye. Remi shivered as goosebumps rolled over his arms. God, he was so out of his depth. He wished he had walked faster when he had sent the waif off to the bridge. Had he already been across the road, he would not have heard the fiend's voice, and he would be home now, finishing his homework. Did that make him heartless? Maybe, but had he heard nothing, the dead girl would be across the bridge to whatever fate had intended. Of course, perhaps the fiend would have eaten it whole, but who was he to say that was true? Just because the creature had looked like a living nightmare didn't mean that it wasn't some kind of guardian angel. Wasn't it shallow of him to judge the thing by its looks? Remi found himself laughing into his hands at the absurdity of it all. The small hand tugged at his collar.
Hey, why is that man staring at us?
What? Remi mumbled into his palms.
That man.
She repeated.
He's coming over here.
Her voice began to wobble dangerously, and he felt her crouch down against his back. With another heavy sigh, Remi pulled his hands from his face slowly to look up and around, trying to spot what the nothing child was seeing. It wasn't difficult, as the second after he looked up, he spotted the man standing in front of him.
You okay, kid?
The man asked Remi. But his eyes were not looking at Remi. They were locked just over his shoulder, where the dead girl huddled behind him.
Need some help there?
The man asked, holding his hand out to Remi, his eyes finally flickering from the child to Remi's upturned face. He could see it. You can see it? Remi said aloud, standing up so quickly that the man had to take a hurried step back to avoid being smacked by the top of Remi's head. The dead girl tumbled to the ground at his sudden movement, but Remi turned around quickly and grasped its arm, pulling the once child up to his side, ignoring its whimper. The man in front of him frowned, eyebrows creasing together in some expression Remi could not quite pin. Worry? Confusion?
It?
The man repeated finally. Remi released the hand he had wrapped around the waif's wrist with a nervous swallow. Maybe he had seen wrong. God, today was turning out to be the worst he'd had in a long time. Remi aimed his gaze at the ground, preparing himself for a mumbled apology and a quick getaway.
That's an incredibly rude thing to call your charge.
The man said, distaste in his voice.
Hey kid, what's your name?
The man's tone was much gentler on his question, and when Remi looked up, the man was crouching down to be eye level with the dead girl. The thing bit its lip, still partially hidden behind Remi, hand once again twisted in his shirt. The thing looked up at Remi with wet eyes and uncertainty, as though waiting for his approval before responding. Remi nodded minutely, unsure of what else to do. The once girl looked back at the man before them, and then looked shyly down at the ground.
Lucinda?
It said softly.
Lucinda.
The man repeated, a wide smile on his face.
That's a pretty name. Do people call you Lucy?
The dead girl's face scrunched up.
Mario does, but he only does it to be mean.
Oh, the man said with a teasing tone.
That sounds like something a brother would do. Is Mario your brother?
Yeah.
The once child said, a little less shy now as it stepped out from behind Remi. Its hand still wrapped around his shirt, but the grip not as firm.
Big brother?
The man asked.
One of them. Alex is older, but he's way nicer.
Well, that's certainly good to hear.
Remi listened to this all with half an ear, as shock held his tongue captive. This man was talking to the dead girl. He could see it and talk to it. This had never happened to him before. Remi's mind passively looked at the form of the man in front of him. He could not have been much older than himself, maybe somewhere in his late teens or early 20s. He was Asian, not very tall. He wore a gray and green flannel shirt open over plain white tee, loose-fitting blue jeans, and beat-up sneakers. Remi watched as the man smiled at the dead girl once more before he looked back up at Remi. The man stood.
Is this your first solo run or something?
The man asked, speaking directly to Remi now.
The way you were cowering on the street, I thought she was trying to possess you or something.
He said with a short laugh. Remi's eyes widened in horror. Can it do that? The slight smile fell from the man's face, and his brows gathered together again.
No, of course she can't. And stop calling her it. Her name is Lucinda.
But it's not a person, it's dead.
And the dead deserve to be respected,
He said with a sharp tone, expression switching from annoyance to anger.
especially by us. Who the hell trained you?
Us? Remi asked, but then his mind fully registered what the man said. Train? You have training? He grabbed the dead girl's arm once more and shoved her at the man before him. So you know what to do. You take it then.
She has a name.
The man snapped, and the sound of it echoed all around him. Suddenly, the very air surrounding the three seemed to tremble and heat. The dead girl between them stood impossibly still, but the glittering shimmer of her skin seemed to vibrate. Remi found he could not tear his gaze away from the man's dark brown eyes, and watched as the color seemed to change, getting lighter in color as he stared Remi down.
Speak her name,
The man commanded. Lucinda, Remi said, helpless but to respond.
and you have accepted charge of her fare?
The man demanded, voice still echoing, air still warming with every spoken word. I have, Remi's mouth said, again without his permission. But that answer seemed to calm the fire in the man's gaze, and the air began to cool once more. Remi took in deep, swallowing gasps of air, suddenly thirsty for it like water. What had just happened?
I'm dead?
The soft question came from the waif between them. Remi glanced down at at Lucinda, for a moment before he looked back up at the man. He was glaring at Remi again.
You haven't even explained...
He cut himself off.
Seriously, who is your master?
I don't have one,
What, so you're out here just leading souls to their crossing by guesswork and high hopes?
he demanded sarcastically. Remi blinked owlishly at that accurate pronouncement. Yes,